Hi, I'd like to continue our intervention schedule and working from the previous topic of Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant. We're going to look at the importance of marriage. We're going to try and make some links. If you haven't already seen the Abrahamic video, I would recommend that you do that. I'm just going to share the screen. And make sure this is working. Okay, so it looks like you can see my screen now. I'm just going to scroll down. I'm using the caboodle. And if we look at marriage, we can see that the Torah actually doesn't give many teachings on marriage. However, within the Talmud, it's explained more deeply, and the rituals that should take place, the nature of the relationship. Now, we'll look at some key words here. The Kedushin is a formal betrothal. So before the marriage takes place, the couple are already promised to each other. They make a binding promise to be engaged or betrothed. And then the actual wedding itself is the Nisuin, is the name of the actual marriage itself. Now, one of the interesting features of the marriage is it takes place under a canopy, a four-sided a canopy with a roof, like a tent without sides, held up by 4 poles. And this is called a chuppah. And it represents the couple's married home. And it shows you the importance of marriage because it forms the basis of a home. And it's the home which is at the center of the continuation of Judaism. No home, no children, no continuation of Judaism. Unlike some other religions, Judaism really doesn't easily allow people to convert to it. You have to be born Jewish. So the only way that Judaism continues is by the production of children within marriage. And the chuppah is held up, the poles supporting the canopy, the roof of the tent, are held up by close family and friends. And that's a lovely symbolism showing that to make a home, you don't do it alone, you do it with a community around you, surrounding and supporting you. And then you, in your turn, will be a support for others in your community. And it links in very much to the idea that God created the world in such a way that was beneficial to marriage. So if I just have a note here, if we look at the Surah of Genesis 1, 27 to 28, I'll just take some key features from it. In there it says, God created them in the image of God. So God created humans like him. And he said, male and female. So there's this natural pairing of male and female, which will unite within marriage. And like all forms of creation, God created over 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. Like all those parts of creation, God says to his creation, says to the man and woman, to the males and females, be fruitful. And we can see that looks very much like have children, and the proper place for those children are within marriage. This shows you how important it is. And we can even make a link back to Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant of the first video, where God promises Abraham that he will be a great nation. And we know that eventually with his wife, Sarah, they were able to have a child, Isaac. And Isaac, in his turn, had children, and one of those, Jacob, continued the promise of Abraham onwards. We call those people the patriarchs. Of course, they didn't do it alone. For example, Abraham and his wife Sarah together were the continuation of that promise, and you can say that shows the importance of marriage. We would also say that it's within the married home that most people would say that the root, the basis of their life exists. It's our everyday interactions in the home that are the most important. If we're not in a home, we're probably sleeping, probably in our home, or we're at work or school. But it's at the home, in our homes, that we would say that the most important interactions and the most important call to holiness exists. Jews are called to be a light to the nation. Light to the nations, sorry. And this idea from the prophet Isaiah, I'll spell that correctly with a proper capital, from the prophet Isaiah, has this idea that Jews are the chosen people and are called to be an example of holiness to all the nations of the earth, because God desires this relationship with everyone. Now, of course, that call to holiness begins in the home, and the root of that is marriage. That shows you how important it is. On the other hand, we can see that some Jews, perhaps, for example, in the Reformed tradition, there's a section of that tradition that may choose to cohabit rather than marry. Now, that may be just for practical reasons because of the cost of housing, or a sense in which they always intend to get married, but they want to trial their marriage by living together. So cohabitation is an option for some Jews. So that tends to detract from the importance of marriage. So you could use that as a counter argument. And going on, if I just erase all this and go to the next page, you will see that the Jewish marriage is I don't want a sticky note. You say the Jewish marriage is actually a contract, and the ketubah is the name of the marriage contract. There's a kind of a picture of it here, the ketubah, and as a contract, contracts can be broken, can be stopped, and in Judaism there is an option of divorce. Because there's an option of divorce, you could argue that takes away from the importance of marriage. If it was more important, you could argue, then divorce would not be allowed, or would be not an option. So it's never a good thing, of course, but it is a possibility in Judaism. Making another link with, going back to Abraham, making another link with the Abrahamic covenants, in the marriage ceremony, the groom, that's the man, stamps on a small glass, and this symbolizes the destruction of the temple. And we learnt in the Abrahamic covenant that Abraham was promised a land, the land of Canaan, and Jews see that as their promised land, a land that they have been promised by God. And whilst that's not something which all Jews or all people agree with, it does show that even within the marriage ceremony, that the reference to the destruction of the temple is referenced. And of course, the temple was destroyed when the Romans exiled Jews from their land. And Jews ever since that time have been praying and longing for a return. And some people see that as the land, the state of Israel, and as the fulfillments of the promised land. So you can say that marriage is important because it reminds people of the longing to return to the promised land and links in to the Abrahamic covenant. Like all marriages, there'll be a party afterwards, a meal and party. And of course, that's more than just a party. It's the first time that the couple can show hospitality to their guests. In a sense, for that time, that party becomes their first wedding show of hospitality, and their first welcoming meal from their home, from their spiritual home. And one final point is to link back to the 7 days of creation. Within Judaism, there are 7 blessings, the Sheva Brekot, 7 blessings. I'll write that down for you. Just put a little sticky note up. No, sticky notes. Sheva Brekot, which means 7 blessings. And you can hopefully see there's a connection between 7 blessings and 7 days of the week. So that marriage is seen as that continuation of God's creativity. So in summary, when thinking about the importance of Jewish marriage, whether it's in fact even the most important ritual, you could say that it is important because it's the basis of the continuation of Judaism, that it fulfills God's instruction in Genesis 1:27 to 28 to be fruitful, male and female to come together. You could argue that Abraham and his wife Sarah were an example for us, and that we can continue the fulfillment of their covenants by being married, with Jews being married and having children. You could also say that it's important because it's the place for everyday holiness. You could argue, on the other hand, that it's not so important because divorce is possible. You could argue it's not so important because cohabitation is a possibility for some Jews, perhaps within the Reformed tradition. And one final point I've not said before is that, going back to Abraham and his covenant, is that the ritual of circumcision, male circumcision, the Brit Milah, is before marriage, before the current form of marriage, the ritual of marriage as known today. So you could argue that Brit Milah is more important because it comes before the ritual of marriage. As ever, please revise. It's your responsibility to revise for your assessments. It could be from anything within Judaism, beliefs and teachings and practices. Good luck.